Welcome. My name is Scott Solberg, Associate Director of Research at the Center on Education and Work. On behalf of the Center, it's my pleasure to welcome you to an afternoon tea, a conversation series on career and workforce development policies and practice held at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. An afternoon tea is being co-sponsored by the Department of Counseling Psychology and the Wisconsin Career Development Association. Our guest today is Dr. Janet Lenz. Dr. Lenz is a faculty member in Florida State University's Department of Educational Psychology and Learning Systems. She's also the Program Director for Instruction, Research, and Evaluation in the Florida State University's Career Center. She received the American Counseling Association's 2007 Professional Development Award and has been past president of the National Career Development Association, where she's also an NCDA Fellow. She's co-authored or authored more than 50 publications in the career area, including books, book chapters, monographs, articles, and technical reports. And our title for today's conversation is Designing Effective Models for Career Service Delivery. Janet, welcome to an afternoon tea.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be here.
One of the things we like to start with in this tea is to learn about you.
Okay.
How did you get interested in career development?
All right. Well, I'm one of those unusual people who actually figured out what I wanted to do and did it. I was a psychology major. Took classes in sociology of occupations and guidance when I was in college, and just became concerned about career guidance services and helping people make choices, partly probably because of my own experience. And I went the route of student personnel services in higher education because I learned that that's a way to be part of a career services center, and did that at Florida State University, and then I worked at the University of Texas in their career center. Briefly went back to Florida State, and then worked at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro in their career center. Okay. Decided I wanted a PhD in the field to have opportunities to teach and consult and be director of a program. So I went back to get my PhD, and so I've been in career services ever since and love it and find something new to do every day and get a great deal of satisfaction from it. So I feel very fortunate.
Was there anyone, or how did the spark, where did that come from?
Well, I had a psychology professor or instructor in high school that I really liked, and I also took a guidance class in college, out of the College of Education at Virginia Commonwealth, and really enjoyed the notion of providing guidance. So it was some faculty members, and I had an aunt who was a social worker, and I was really intrigued with her work in helping people, but I really found my interest in this notion of occupations and helping people make choices, and have been able to do that, and it fits my skills and talents very well.
Now, you've been a major contributor in the career information processing approach to career development and career theory, and you've been working with some important people, Gary Peterson, Jim Sampson, Bob Reardon. What's that like? What's the collaboration like with the four of you?
It's fantastic. We're fortunate that all of those individuals, and all of us could have left and gone somewhere else, but we all made a commitment to stay at Florida State and build on this work. Certainly Bob Reardon gets the credit for initiating this idea of differentiated service delivery in the early 1970s. And then the theory piece came along. Gary Peterson took a cognitive psychology class, and he comes into our place and says, I have some ideas. And so that led to them writing the 91 book. And they invited me in shortly after that when we began to implement it in the center. And I was head of direct services in the Career Center for 17 years before moving into my faculty role. So Bob and Gary are retired, Professor Emeriti, but we built a new center, and they have offices on either side of me, so I have plenty of brain power on both sides of my office. And Jim Sampson has an office in the Career Center. So our Career Center is unique in some ways. There are only a few like this in the country that have invited faculty in, and so we have this sort of hotbed of energy and ideas. Gary calls the Career Center his sandbox. And so we let him play around. But Jim always talks about my role as, Janet has this line, if I don't understand it, if I can't teach career counselors to use it, and if clients can't understand it, we're not going to do it. So I'm sort of the gatekeeper for their ideas, but we inspire each other. We take different roles on projects. If you see our work, there's a different lead author many of the times. And so we sit and we have tech center meetings about what we're going to do, and it's great. There are no egos involved. We all look at how we can make a contribution to moving the theory forward and improve practice and career services for people, not just in our center, but literally all over the world.
Yeah, and so really the focus you've been really taking is the translation of it into the actual everyday practice.
Guides everything we do. And if you read our books and our articles, because we live in this, on some campuses, maybe the faculty have never visited the Career Center, but we are located physically in the Career Center. So if it doesn't work downstairs, and it's a center that's open to the public, so my colleague, Dr. Darren Carr, ran some statistics for the fall contacts we had, and they ranged in age from 15 to 63. And so if I can't use it with anyone who walks in the door, then it's just not going to fly. And we're training. We have 15 career advisors who are graduate students. We have to train them to do this, and other staff as well. And so they have to be able to remember it and use it, and then implement it in practice with anyone who comes in.
So let's get talking about what this is, that you're doing. And I want to come back to the career information processing kind of perspective. But just as kind of a primer for that, you mentioned that Bob Reardon came up with this idea of differentiated kind of a process of service delivery.
Right.
Describe what that is, and maybe describe how that gets played out then within your counseling career center.
Okay. Well, when he was first at Florida State, he was part of the counseling center, and they had long waiting lines and lists of people seeking help. And he realized that a lot of these persons had career concerns, vocational concerns, needed information, and had the idea that you could create, at the time it was called the Curricular Career Information Service. And so you can see it doesn't have counseling in the title, it's an information service, and serve a lot of people quickly with some basic concerns. And that evolved once their CIP theory took hold, and the notion of student and client's readiness for career services. Do they have very complex situations and low capability, or are they very capable and have not such a complex situation? So part of our process in this approach is to screen individuals coming in two ways. One with a very brief interview, and then with a more detailed, comprehensive assessment. In our case, we use the Career Thoughts Inventory, but to decide what level of help someone needs. Is that self-help? They're highly motivated, very capable, and can make use of the career resource room and online resources with a minimal amount of help, or brief staff assisted, where it's practitioner assisted. We write an individual learning plan, which is something different from what's used here in Wisconsin, but we create an individual learning plan around the gaps in their career situation. Do they need information about themselves or options, help with decision making, help with thinking? And so they can use resources in the Career Resource Center and online with a little bit of help from a practitioner. In this case, we're using mostly paraprofessionals. Or they have a higher level of need. They have high complexity, they have low capability, in which case we would have them be seen individually. But the shift is, Bob long ago said not everybody needs individual counseling. And so as Jim and all of us have written about this, you save the most expensive resource, which is individual counseling with a highly skilled practitioner, for only those individuals who need that. And the vast majority, and roughly 3,000 individuals a semester will drop in and get that brief staff assisted, but they'll be screened for whether they can really function quite well on their own, and they'll just log into the center and make use of resources. Or we're checking in with them, and I might check in with them, and then another person comes on duty and checks in with them. But they're capable of using the resources on their own. And so
what is you said that the person who may need more services, more complexity of the situation,
right.
less ready.
Right.
What does that look like in those?
Well, so if you can think about this as kind of a grid, so the top line running north and south is complexity, high and low, and then across the line, capability, low and high. And so if they have high complexity and low capability, they're in that needing the most care.
What does that mean, though, when you say,
you say
high complexity or low complexity?
Well, complexity typically has four things, and this gets into context and life issues and the broader situation that they're facing. So it could be family matters, it could be society-related discrimination, harassment, it could be the economy in general. They've experienced very difficult things in
Job
the workplace,
loss
and then organizational issues. So complexity, to just keep it manageable, we include those four factors: family, society, organizations, and the economy. But there's a lot mixed into that. So You know, in about 5 minutes oftentimes someone just is sharing their situation, even in a brief screening interview, and they've left their spouse, they've lost their job, they've developed a disability. You've got complexity,
right.
and you know that in 5 minutes of talking to them. Right. But we also use a screening tool, and as I mentioned, the Career Thoughts Inventory, that lets us know that they have a lot of negative thinking about their career situation. And so in different settings, use other kind of screening tools. We use the My Vocational Situation for many years. It helps us understand where the gaps are in their career situation. They don't feel like they're good decision makers, they don't feel like they know themselves, they don't feel like they know anything about options, or their overall thinking is just very, they lack a sense of, if you will, self-efficacy about being able to solve career problems and make career decisions. So with that intake information, maybe a screening tool, and in collaboration with the student or client, we make some decisions about what level of help is most appropriate for them.
So the typical, as you said, I mean, not all, in fact, the majority coming in are not needing the traditional counseling kind of model. So
right.
What does their profile look like then? And so they have some capabilities,
right.
less complexity. What would be some examples of that?
Well, they've lost their job and they need to look for another one, but they're motivated and they're not experiencing any difficult family situations. They're reasonably verbal. They're able to make good use of information. So when you think about CIP, it sort of boils down to the knowing and the doing. What does the person know? What knowledge do they have at hand? What additional knowledge do they need? And what are they going to do about it? How are they going to use it? And so when you think about a client who's functioning pretty well, they know some things about themselves, they know something about option, but they just can't move that forward for some reason in the context of their life situation. They're, in Holland's terms, their personal career theory is not working. So, but the resources in the center and the encouragement and the relationship with the career advisor and the individual learning plan that helps them kind of see the way forward helps them make and take that next step.
And they have the ability to take advantage of that.
And they have the ability, yes, to profit from that.
Right. No, that's great.
Yeah.
So one area then is and obviously critical to the whole process, is first figuring out what the level of need is.
That readiness,
for
yes,
that
readiness
service
screening,
delivery.
right.
And maybe we can talk about what it looks like in a center like this. And by the way, this is not just in a college center. You also have samples of these around the world where communities have taken on the concept. So I don't want it to sound like just a college, although we can certainly talk about Florida State. So I come in and I do this assessment. What's the rest of this process look like then in terms, you mentioned a resource room and there's people running around and helping, and what is this like?
Well, and I will tell you, since we don't have a lot of time today, is you can go on our Tech Center website, career.fsu.edu/Tech Center, and see this and see slideshows about this. So they walk in the door, and this could be in a workforce center, this could be in a community college, this could be in a community-based career center. And the line, and Jim Sampson is famous for saying, but what brings you in today? So the focus is on the student or the client. And so you may have what Jim Sampson calls a greeter, or someone at the front desk who hears a little bit of that information. Now they might say, I'm looking for the third floor, so we will forward them on. But if they have a career need, then they're going to go to the career advisor. And the career advisor is going to sit down with them and ask some questions. What brought you in? Tell me a little bit about your situation. If they detect that the person seems to have a greater level of need, it's not a straightforward information question, they're going to administer something like the CTI. They're going to do a more comprehensive screening. And then together, based on the knowledge they gain from the interview and from the assessment, the screening assessment, they're going to develop an individual learning plan. So they're going to they're going to collaborate with the student or individual to understand what their goal is, what they're hoping to accomplish by coming into the center. And the individual learning plan will then focus on the needs that person has. And this is a collaborative process, so it's reinforcing. The client might say, I really need to go over to the marine science department and talk to them about classes to take. So how would it be if you did that, and then we'll kind of pick up from there after you've gone and talked. So that gets written on the ILP. So it reinforces, again, our goal is that they learn to solve career problems and make career decisions. So it reinforces that they have the capability to do that. And we don't keep a record of that. That's their own individual learning plan. We put it in a folder, but We give them guides, we give them information materials from computer-based systems. So it depends on where the gaps are for them.
Let's talk about the guides then. I mean, that's a big part of things, right? You do give them some ideas and structure.
Well, you know, that's one of the things about how this center has grown up, the Curricular Career Information Service. Information in many forms was always a part of the center, and that includes traditional computer-based guidance systems, occupational information. But then over the years, and interesting, many of these paraprofessionals have worked there, have created guides, resource guides, and Jim Sampson has written a really good piece about how you do this in his new monograph that NCDA published on developing and implementing career programs. It's a step-by-step, you know, resource. How do you create a guide? So there are guides on job searching on the internet, researching employers, choosing a major or career, writing a resume, going to graduate school, finding a part-time job, finding a job in Tallahassee. And so, and they're also instructional modules. There are module sheets that came with the original center in the 70s that, again, it's the focus on learning. We want to put in the hands of the learner how to do this. So if you come in to choose a major, I'm going to reinforce that here are the steps and you can execute this yourself if you're fairly capable and don't have a lot of complexity, i.e. you're not failing out of school, you haven't changed your major 6 times, you're chronically indecisive. So we can use all of those information tools, plus our theory has been put in client form. So the pyramid of information processing, the guide to good decision making, we have handouts on all that. So we teach people the process, and so they have an ILP, they have an understanding of how the process works, and they have information resources to support either their knowledge about options or their knowledge about selves. And then part of it is then how do you execute that plan, and that's what the ILP does.
Right, right. Well, let's talk a little bit then about the whole model, because what you're really, you've said a couple of things that's really important, I think. One is you're developing skills.
Right.
But you're also making action happen.
Right.
And so this kind of individual plan kind of guides them or helps them articulate what actions need to take place.
Right.
But you're really on a developmental pathway. And so, you know, you're helping them develop those skill sets and the different things that they need. Talk about that in terms of the different, for people that aren't familiar with the whole model and how it works.
Well, and there's, like I said, there's a lot more detail on our website, so if you want to actually engage with this. But the cognitive information processing theory, I mean, in some ways it mirrors what we've been doing in career counseling and guidance for many years. So we've always been concerned about self-knowledge, how people think about themselves, how they're learning, their life experiences has influenced that, and then how they think about options. So they either have maybe a really complex schema about options or they not so well developed. And so any career guidance intervention has to deal with those two areas. And if you look all over the world or look at any theory, so we've always had in place mechanisms for that. The other big piece is decision making. Whether people are designing their lives or following their career journey, they're still making a series of decisions. So having embedded in the model an effective problem-solving decision-making approach is a very important part of that, because people's confidence in their ability as decision makers is critical to them being successful in this. And then the piece that was added, and a lot of people were tracking on this, the irrational beliefs, the negative thinking, the negative self-talk, and so that was, we had the bottom part, that was the big aha. Why are people not able to take information about themselves and information about options and act on it? And it was that self-talk, that self-awareness, that control and monitoring, but it was in the context of the capability and the complexity of their lives that made that difficult. So we took that basic theoretical approach and implemented it into our service delivery model. We teach clients the theory. We teach middle schoolers the theory, because you can put it on a very basic level. And they understand the steps, and they understand they can look at the decision-making model, we call it the Kasabi cycle, and they can say, this is where I'm stuck. I'm getting input from my important people in my life, and I can't seem to make a decision. So we have visuals of all of those things that we use with students and clients. And so it takes the mystery out of it. It takes it out of the counselor's head, and it says, here's a theory that you can use. So I mean, just the title of the 2004 book, Career Information Processing Approach to Career Counseling and Services. Not many theories have service delivery in their title, and so we have married those two together in our center to be cost efficient in how we serve people while still giving a quality service to them.
And one of the things that's unique then is even though we're talking about service delivery, what you're really talking about is still how you're organizing work with an individual, with another individual. So it's not that you're just finding ways to put them on a computer or put them places. You're looking at interaction methods, some more intense, some less intense, but it's still an interactive environment.
And you can teach this to counselors in training and paraprofessionals. I mean, Jim Sampson in his class has them, I mean, part of the exam is you have to draw this, so you have to be able to hold it in working memory and teach it to clients, and that's the challenge with a lot of our approaches and theories. You can't remember them, and if you can't remember them or translate them, you won't use them. And so people are able to use these in practice, and it's like John Crumble says, I mean, theory is a roadmap, theory is a guide, and that's what CIP theory does in our center. It's a guide to practice.
Now but the CASAVI part of that is really the guideposts in many ways, in the sense that it's walking the person through concrete steps. So maybe we can unpack that a little bit, starting with the C. You know, so what, and I assume that's where we're starting with.
Right. Well, and so CASVE, it looks like CASV if you're from the South, but we call it CASAVI cycle. And so communication is getting in touch with what brought them to whatever career services facility. So there might be internal cues. I'm feeling anxious. My unemployment benefits are running out.
I have to choose a major.
I have to choose a major, which is going to happen right after spring break when the summer schedule comes out. It might be external factors. So someone in your family is telling you, why haven't you gotten a job yet? When are you going to move out of the spare room so we can remodel it? Or there, in our case on campus, the letter from the dean, undergraduate dean, says you can't register for classes. So that it's getting in touch with what the nature of the career problem or career decision is. The analysis is all the information about the pyramid. So what have they been like as a decision maker? How do they think about options? How are they talking to themselves about the situation? Gary Peterson likes to call it getting in touch with the problem space. What's everything that's going on with this person's career situation? So analysis, literally analyzing all of that to understand their career situation. And you might have data about that. You might have a career thoughts inventory or some other screening
So assessments are coming into that.
You could. The synthesis is just understanding how they think about options. You know, we use a little simple tool on our campus, the occupational alternatives question. It's list all the occupations you're considering. That's a powerful little tool in the sense that some people will write down very specific alternatives. Other people will say something in sports. You know, so you can immediately get into their schema about the world of work. And so some people are trying to expand options and think about where they can go. And that can be as creative as somebody wants to make it. You can do a career style interview and learn about what they're thinking about in terms of options, or you can do something more structured. You can have them get on a computer-based guidance system in terms of either expanding their options. But then the concern is, if someone said, I'm thinking about 10 majors, well, that's too many. So how do you help them narrow that down? And that's...
Or if they only have one.
Or if they only have one and they want more. But on a lot of college campuses, you've got very bright people who like a lot of things, can do a lot of things. So they're undifferentiated high, they can do it all. They take the career planning class and pass it, and then they still don't know what they want to do. And then valuing gets into the complexity of their lives. Valuing is not just about the person, which is what, in Western traditions, people talk about, oh, you're just focused on the person. It deals with family, it deals with culture, society, community. So who is involved in that person's decision that will help them arrive at a first choice? So there are these benchmarks along the way where people do have to say, I'm going to commit to this. Call it a decision, call it what you will, but they're committing. But the important part about valuing too, in addition to the complexity that it takes into account, is that it's all about having options. So it's plan A, B, and C. And it's not, in our society, with the idea that your first choice may not work out, then you have other alternatives that you consider appropriate. So that's the V, and then the execution brings you to a specific action plan or individual learning plan to execute your first choice. Coming back to communication, because the important part of this is I had this gap. I was at a place where I didn't want to be, and I had somewhere, my goal is to get a job, or my goal is to choose a major. did we close the gap? How do you feel about the process?
Or did another problem arise?
And did another problem arise, in which case you would go through again. And we don't define problem, you know, some people have in mind that problem is a bad thing. Problem can be a good thing. I have 10 majors I like, and that's a problem. But it's good that you can do 10 majors.
That's
so,
right.
But yeah, that's the heart of this. And clients and students resonate with that because they can see where they're stuck in that process too. And there are certainly, you know, decision-making models very similar to that. But at some level, you have to engage around the person's need to make a choice and make a decision.
In some of the misconceptions that come up is the focus on decision-making as really that's the piece. Let's get a decision made.
Right.
But as you talk about it, it seems a little more complex than that.
Well, it's just, yeah, I mean, that's one piece of it. I mean, but when you engage around all that's going on with the person in terms of the pyramid, and then if you delve into all the aspects of the Kasavi cycle, and then you deal with the complexity and capability, as well as how they're thinking about this, you've got a lot of things to attend to. And for us, you can stay within CIP, and in our case, we use Holland's theory as well. You can deal with everything that's going on with the person by staying within those two perspectives. It doesn't get better by adding more stuff because you can really account for everything in a person's life, career situation with that, and you can very quickly teach them that, help them move forward with that, and career advisors who are working very quickly with individuals can form a relationship, use all of those elements, and help the client feel like they've been helped.
And I'm assuming that underneath this is a lot more exploration than might be assumed in reading it.
Well, I mean, exploration is, to me, part of any career problem solving and decision making process. So, I mean, there's always self-exploration. And, you know, again, some people criticize things because, all right, you use traditional assessments. Well, we use other kind of assessments too. We don't just use the standard, you know, likes, dislikes. I mentioned earlier we use something called the decision space worksheet that asks the person what's the main decision or career issue they're focusing on. And then in a circle, they identify all the factors that relate to that. And then in a circle, they draw circles to indicate how big that factor is impacting them. It's a very projective tool. You learn a lot about what's going on with the person. So, I mean, that's sort of a self and lifestyle exploration piece. But then we use career resources of every kind, both web-based and print-based, to help them expand their knowledge about options and ways to think about the world of work.
Right, because usually when we think about decision making, it's you've got to decide on an option. But in this model, and I guess the part that's hard to see is that they're immersed within all of these resources. So at each of these steps, they have the opportunity to continue going farther, exploring a wider range, really looking at some options, and not just the idea of closing down.
No, absolutely not. And you can explore the information about themselves, like I said, with whatever tools you want to use, and then the same is true of option knowledge. I mean, you want to capture their own brainstorm and daydreams about options, but you also can use then other information resources, be they computer-based guidance systems or print resources or whatever you have access to.
How does this translate into non-university settings?
Well, I think it translates very well in the sense that Jim Sampson has gone around the world and convinced policymakers and local governments to use it. And you know, even though we're in a university setting, we're open to the public, so we know it works well with all kinds of individuals. And part of, I think, the challenge is if a setting, whether it's a workforce center or community college or whatever it happens to be, if they're wedded to people staying in their offices and seeing one-on-one appointments, it takes a lot of work to break out of that culture and say, we're going to have this open resource room, you're going to have people on shifts in that room, there's going to be this ebb and flow, I might be talking to you here, there's somebody over here at this table having a conversation, and your counseling and career advising is going to now be out in the open for all the world to see. So I know, you know, Jim has run into some situations where there's obviously been some pushback. People are just not ready to embrace that. And, you know, if the powers that be say, we're going to try this, we're going to use this, you know, some people readily embrace it, other people would have more challenges with it. Plus, it really does depend heavily on people using information well, using information to help individuals fill the gaps that they have in their knowledge.
Well, you talk about use information, but it's really accessibility of information.
Yeah, both.
You're expanding the range of how they can get to information.
Right.
It can be done on a one-on-one, it can be done in a written form, an online form.
Sure.
And you're trying to help support the person with what their needs are.
Yeah, I mean, we're awash in information in today's internet age, and it's kind of, how does the practitioner or career advisor help a person make good use of that if they're having difficulty turning information into a plan and a decision for themselves? Yeah.
Yeah. So in the sense of getting out of a traditional college setting, one of the fundamental things that's going on in your plan is having this open space where people are going to have a number of resource materials. So you're not just planning, I'm going to see you at every 50 minutes, I've got a new client coming in.
No.
You have some of those services going on, but that's a much smaller part of the domain of services.
Right. And it's a dynamic environment. I mean, our director, Jeff Garris, came down from Penn State and had not seen anything like this. And we won him over in the sense that he likes the dynamic of being out there, and you never know who or what's going to walk in, and you've helped this person and they're working on, let's say, filling out some form or researching information. So you say, I'm going to leave you for a moment, I'm going to go over here and see this person. Right. And people come in together, you know, and again, it could be community people coming in as friends. So you have campuses breed togetherness between Greek, so you have people, so you'll be at a table, our career advisors will be at a table working with 2 people at once, and you're writing ILPs for both of them. So it's very dynamic, and it.
How does it work in a community setting then? What are some of the?
Well, I mean, it could work exactly the same way. You know, you storefront shop. The key is, there's a piece on our website that I mentioned in the paper, the key elements to doing this. So first of all, you have to screen and determine what level of help people need. You use the theory pieces to give people a common language in terms of working with clients. You provide some common staff training so people feel some comfort with doing this. You develop resources that people can use, and you develop with, you know, obviously you have considerations around budget, around reading levels, around learning styles. We try to accommodate different types of learners in our setting by having print materials and video materials and computer materials, but all of those kind of constraints have to be taken into consideration. And so, you know, if you have all this, you know, using paraprofessionals that have been trained, they have a theory that guides their practice that they can understand. You have people with a core level of skills, but then maybe you have some specialized people to deal with the people that have more difficult, have greater needs and may have career and mental health issues that are at work. And so you can create all of those elements anywhere that you actually have a physical space. And then if, you know, obviously we have a career website to support this, and it's just how much tech support you have to also maintain an online presence for people, and having the assessments online or having the computer-based guidance systems accessible. And we've built a career library section on our website that was guided by a professional librarian. And so we don't just put anything up on the website. We have some criteria about what gets up there so clients aren't overwhelmed with that.
And that would certainly work then within a high school, middle school type setting as well, where they may not have the space for all the print materials.
Absolutely.
But by designing kind of an online environment or a resource room where multiple things can happen, the big shift is I'm not bringing them into an office. I'm bringing them into an environment.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I used this story earlier about, you know, a bookstore. You walk in a bookstore now, and there are people reading by themselves, looking at things together, people looking at computers. And, you know, in my mindset when we designed our new career center, I wanted, you know, a Borders bookstore down in the library. But it's like that now. I mean, there are tables where you can be working together. There are tables that are more intimate. So it's designing a space like that, and it doesn't have to be a big space. I mean, we started out in the 70s when I was doing this, we were in a very small area.
But that there is a space created.
There is a space.
Yeah, it's not.
And that people are willing to come out of their offices and
to work in
sort of engage with a lot of different learners and users, and you know, I might see somebody on Tuesday, but they come back in on Thursday and work with somebody else. But the ILP is the linking piece so that you don't have to see the same person.
That's right, that's right. So we know what goals you're focused on.
Right, right.
And then you can just take it right from there.
Yeah.
Something else that comes into this whole conversation, and I know Jim gave a big speech on this in Finland over the summer, it has to do with the issue of efficiency of services.
Right.
And certainly as you're describing, one of the things, you're not doing it just for efficiency.
No.
You're doing it because it's probably, the person doesn't need an hour.
Right.
And it's probably not helpful for them to be sitting for an hour when they can be doing something.
Right.
So there really is a real value to the individual, but there's also something from, if you're an administrator looking at the costs of running a center,
Yes.
there are some efficiencies. Maybe you could talk a little about that, how you measure the fact that you're getting services delivered in an effective but also in a larger way.
Well, and I mean, what Jim wrote about, it really is on a larger, you know, global scale. It's a social justice issue in that there are thousands, literally thousands of people who need help. Now we're on a campus of 40,000, and we know people need help. And what Bob Reardon observed years ago was that we had this long waiting list, and it really wasn't necessary. There were students who needed to be served, and so it was. We can meet their needs more efficiently by, you know, determining what they really need, having information resources, as well as well-trained helping people. And so it's been, you know, we've assessed this. I was, you know, talking earlier, we've done, you know, evaluation follow-ups with clients, we've done focus groups, we've done called non-participant observation to check on how well clients' needs are being met. So, you know, we have a 40-year history of just knowing that this works well, that we've served a lot of people, and we don't have long waiting lists of people waiting to be seen. And so I think the message for policymakers and stakeholders is, you know, if you're saying that in your country meeting the career guidance needs of people is important, how are you going to do that? You can't do that through individual counseling.
You
absolutely cannot. And so, you know, this is one way to think about doing that, and knowing that it works and people are satisfied, and it's stood the test of time as an approach.
And it seems like when we talk about the steps to evaluating our services, the one step is we have to know, are we offering good quality services?
Right.
And that, you know, and you've talked about having evaluation standards for the online resources, the kinds of books that are available, the having templates for help, for support, structure type templates, and there's theory and research behind some of those elements. So the quality of the content has to be there. And then the next piece is, are we getting to the population that needs it? And that efficiency piece certainly has a social justice piece. It also has just an accountability piece. And can we account for it? And then that next level is, are they satisfied? Are they getting what they need? But you're also able to evaluate how effective the model is in terms of promoting career development. So the person may or may not be as satisfied, or they could be very well satisfied, but doesn't mean they've necessarily had something that's robust. But you've done that research as well, where you've taken a look at, they've gone through a program, you can even be in a course setting, but they go through the model, and you've got measurable outcomes to say movement and development is occurring.
Well, and we've used the Career Thoughts Inventory as a tool to say, you know, how are people thinking about their career situation and how has that changed? And the course, we do teach a course, 16 weeks, that we know has an impact on how people think about their career situations, and so feeling more informed about their career situation. So,
questions up here? Chris? 6 minutes? Do you have a question? I just need one. We're trying something new today, where we actually have some blogging going on or some conversations, and so when he said 7 questions, it's because there are people who are listening and talking and writing questions.
That is correct.
Okay, so what would be one of those 7?
Sure. The first question is from Susan Grannery. Is the CTI assessment and workbook available online or hard copy? Wanting to know where they can locate that.
The CIP, is it? Okay.
CIP?
Some of the resources.
CTI?
Okay.
CTI, yes.
Career Thoughts Inventory? Okay.
all right, well, this is the shameless plug here. So, but I mentioned we use the Career Thoughts Inventory and the Career Thoughts Inventory Workbook. Those are published by PAR and PAR Inc. You can go there. They're not online. They're hard copy. But our goal in having the screening tool was to have something that could be quickly administered, quickly scored, and easily understood by both the client and the practitioner. And so we published an article in the Career Development Quarterly a number of years ago on all the readiness assessment measures there are. But we wanted something that fit our theory and helped us to quickly understand a person's situation, to help us know with them where to intervene. The test doesn't make decisions, that we make those in collaboration with the student or client. But we worked with the publisher, PAR, to publish the CTI and the CTI workbook, and we use both of those in pretty much everything we do, from one-on-one to brief staff-assisted to courses to groups, to quickly understand the needs of the persons that we're serving.
Well, and you mentioned also that you're balancing it with also understanding some of the complexities and things. How does that get assessed in the process? Is that a formal assessment, or is that more of just hearing about their situation?
That's more about hearing about their situation. The decision space worksheet gets at that, and there's a scale on the CTI, the external conflict, that gets at input from important people in their lives. That, you know, it's valuing input, but then feeling like I'm having a hard time making a decision because of the messages I'm getting from important people.
And then that can be the starting point to really elaborate on that.
Right, so
yeah.
There are other tools out there that deal more with complexity, I think, like the Career Attitudes and Strategies Inventory and some of the other instruments. So yeah, complexity is more through the interview and the decision space worksheet.
Now, some would, you know, we've got different camps out there.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about, because now we're focusing on assessment.
Right.
But you're not a formal all about assessment, at least as you've described it. You have assessment that gets incorporated.
Right.
But it feels like it's more of a starting point than it is the full answer to the person's issues. Am I right on that, or am I?
Well, assessment cuts across many different things. So there's assessment, which we would call readiness assessment, to get a sense of a person's readiness to engage in career problem solving and decision making. So there's that type of assessment. But then if you think about the pyramid, it's like assessing their self-knowledge. And so those are the traditional tools that we use, like the self-directed search or the assessments on computer-based guidance systems. You may want to understand their occupational knowledge or how they think about options, and something as simple as that OAQ I mentioned, where you just ask them to list the ones they're thinking about, which gets inside their own head as opposed to imposing external schema on them. And then you might want to understand their decision-making status, and there are lots of tools out there for that. The CTI for us has a decision-making confusion scale, so we assess that. And then assessing their thinking, which obviously the CTI gets at. So when you talk about assessment, I mean, again, we're used to some of the traditional assessments, the guide that NCDA published on Counselor's Guide to Career Assessments.
Right.
You can think about across all of those areas, and we're cognizant of that. We have tools in place to address each of those. But they're, again, easy to use, easy to train people in their use, and clients can quickly understand them. They're not heavily dependent or hardly at all dependent on one-on-one traditional counseling
They're not needing the full-on interpretation to make meaning out of it.
Right.
So it goes back to something I was bringing up before, which is you're really helping them develop skill sets.
Right.
To think about and learn about themselves in relation to this process. And to the extent that the assessments are there, it's really jump-starting that and giving them some structure.
Right, right. It's teaching them to fish, like as the old adage goes, rather than bringing the fish to them. And so yes, assessment has a place in all of that, but it's in the context of the larger model.
Right. Okay. Another question.
Yes. Another question from our live chat room from H. Zhang. The comment, this person would like you to comment further on the global mobility of the model you highlight. Share the assets of this model to reach diverse populations all over the globe.
Okay.
Right.
It's a good question, and we've been fortunate. My colleague Jim Sampson has literally been all over the globe. I've been a few places on the globe. You know, the essential elements of the model translate very well. People resonate with these ideas that you have to think about each of these areas. The CTI has been translated into, I think, at least 6 different languages. There is some challenge in negative thoughts and how negative phrases are treated in certain languages, so that's been one challenge. I think the other challenge that many nations face. I mean, we take for granted that we have occupational information in this country. We've had NOICS and SOICS. We have
There's books.
the OH. We have the ONET. And we were in China fall of 2008, and the reality of dealing with a country that large where you don't have the OH to reach, or you don't have the ONET. So I think one of the global challenges is when you're in countries and regions of the world where you don't have accessible occupational information. If that's part of the choice-making process and the context in which you're operating, then you have to, you know, deal with what you've got. So that might be interviews with the local people. That might be, you know, putting a cell phone in the hands of people and doing interviews with individuals to build occupational information, because you don't have necessarily governments creating that. So I think that's one of the issues.
So really what we need to talk about is almost what the countries are in terms of development. So in Europe, this would translate quite well.
Right.
And you're in a lot of, there's a lot of stuff going on in Europe, Finland and in Ireland, and also Australia and places like that that have an infrastructure set up for labor market information. Within those contexts, you could set up something in even a storefront type thing with enough resources, training. You need at least one professional, but you can have other paraprofessionals to address the situation. But then you go to South Africa where you have limited internet. Everyone may have a cell phone. It changes the service delivery. And there would be more challenges. And as we get into lower income countries, I would bet again there would be some additional challenges that would be difficult to translate.
I mean, the good news is it's designed to reach a lot of people. You could train paraprofessionals to do this. You don't need an elaborate space or system to do it. But if they're wanting to learn about options, how are you going to deliver that? And that would be the challenge in some of those societies and countries.
Connecting them up to occupations within their labor market is difficult if you don't have labor market information.
That's correct. And
it also seems, though, as I look at the Kavasi model,
Kasavi.
Yes. I'm going to get it in a lot of different ways. I'm kind of known for that. I can take anything and make it come out in different ways. The model seems, at least on the surface, to have face validity across cultures. Because you're not telling them what the problems are. You're saying we need to understand what your definition is of the problem.
They're communicating.
And that's going to then be culturally based. The valuation right away, as you think about what it is that's going into how you make decisions. If you're in a more collectivist culture, family's going to be a big part of this. It's not going to be a one-on-one. It's going to be bring the family in. Let's have a conversation. So it seems like you're already built in. Certainly, as you said, the assessments would have to be carefully evaluated for cross-cultural relevance. But beyond that, the fact that you're open to so many of the qualitative, generative kinds of assessments as part of this, it seems like intuitively it feels like there's some face validity to the model.
Someone could build in those kinds of things. In fact, Gary Peterson did a workshop here at the conference a month or so ago, 2 months ago, that showed how you can use different types of assessments within the context of the model, and you can use unstructured or more structured assessments. And so depending on the cultural context, you'd make some choices about that. But if you're trying to serve a lot of people, you really don't have the luxury of doing maybe a more time-intensive kind of thing with people. And if we don't have the evidence that necessarily produces a better outcome, you can still work with more traditional kinds of assessments, taking into context that person's life history and life experience.
Right. I would still think it would be difficult within lower income countries where you don't have occupational opportunity. Because a lot of what you're doing is around matching them to the opportunities. So there has to be some assumption that there are occupations available for them to move into.
Well, and I wouldn't even think of the M word necessarily, but I mean, Jim Sampson talks about working in Turkey and using this, and it's sort of, all right, you have an option to do X or Y, and you still have to figure out, I mean, the options are actually, because they're small and few, they're actually more knowable, and so, or in South Africa, am I going to, you know, if someone's like, I can work in the mines or I can work in the city with a vending or retail kind of shop in the city that sells
I still need to go through a process to make that decision.
Am I going to stay here and do this? And so, I mean, David Bluestein wrote eloquently about this. The options may be very limited, but you're still faced with which of those two am I going to do?
Right, and needing to have a process for that. That'd be good. We have another question coming in.
Yes, we have another question from Joanne Allen speaking around the assessment. Which career assessment do you recommend in identifying transferable skills in clients?
Interesting.
All right. Well, I'm not going to go there so much in terms of naming names. I will say that I think computer-based guidance systems have useful tools to do that with. I also am a big fan of card sorts, and there are several different types of those out there. One of the reasons I like card sorts is it allows people to provide their own narrative about how they view their skills. But the other big thing, and I know this is happening in Wisconsin, is the use of e-portfolios. So we use an e-portfolio that has 9 transferable skills in it, and students can add their own skills that are unique to their profession or discipline. So the nice part about an e-portfolio is that they have to provide documentation of where they developed that skill, how they've used that skill. So we've pioneered the use of this portfolio in college and university settings, and it's been picked up by a number of places, including a national vendor. But, you know, you don't need a sophisticated system like that. You can use card sorts, you can use checklists, you can use computer-based guidance systems that have skill assessments. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about having a diversity of resources. So clients who are more tactical or artistic may like the hands-on approach of a card sort. A more analytical client might enjoy interacting with a computer-based guidance system. Someone else might like the notion of creating a portfolio to document their skills. And having several different ways of doing that, I think, is the more important idea rather than necessarily adopting one particular vendor.
So one of the ways of looking at transferable skills is I've just lost a job and I need to know what occupations I can go into. And certainly there's strategies, as you mentioned, the online systems can help with that. But there's also the idea of understanding your skill base.
Yes, right.
And recognizing that you have a huge range of skills, and the e-portfolio becomes a great way to catalog and be able to communicate that, because you can share that with an employer and things like that.
It does, yeah. And those are, there are many varieties of those. We happen to just develop our own at Florida State, but there are many others that are quite useful in that way. And that reflective piece of, I did this experience, but here's how I know I've developed that skill.
Right.
And we've, tested ours out with employers, and they've found it valuable to this was partly our president wanted students to have a sense of their skill set as opposed to just this major. And then that's really what led to the development of it.
Yeah, no, I think college campuses, when they can demonstrate the workforce readiness skills that are coming out of their graduates, it's probably going to be a good marketing strategy.
Yes, exactly.
No doubt, no doubt. Time for one more, Chris?
Oh yeah, we've got time.
Oh, you got time? Okay.
I'll keep talking until someone tells me to stop. So
Okay, what do you have?
we got some more great questions on our online system here. Barb Simonson has a question. She's in a class. After looking at current labor market information, older students in my career planning class are often interested in green occupations. However, we can't seem to find actual occupational titles or where the education for green careers can be obtained. Where can I go for this information?
Well, I think this brings up something you and I talked about, which is that one of the values of career information systems is there's a lot of information. One of the problems of career information systems is it's limited information.
Right.
And green careers would be a perfect example that if they're not able to move as quickly as the changing labor environment, then we have to have some additional materials. And maybe you could describe how you guys are addressing the green career phenomenon as it's coming up.
Well, there have been a number of, and I can't cite these off the top of my head, but there have been a number of articles. Even NCDA published a piece in the Career Developments magazine about that. But popular magazines have focused on green careers. So I think if you, do a search online, you can actually turn up articles about this. Sometimes you have to look to traditional groups like environmental groups or architectural groups or energy, and those areas are actually promoting the notion of green jobs within their industry. So in some ways you have to go back to traditional occupations that are now moving in that direction. There's a magazine called Fast Company that I read that helps keep me on the cutting edge of things like green occupations. And it's interesting, we've had clients come in and talk about, I want to work in the sustainability field, which is the same as sort of green jobs. And so our librarian has been tasked with going out, and we it seems old-fashioned, but we do things like clip magazine articles and And we just go searching for those sort of things and keep files of those in the Career Center. We still have occupational files with that sort of information. We've long had a handout. We've created what we call sheets matching areas of study to occupation. So we have one on ecology and environment, and that's moving into a green jobs piece. So sometimes you have to grow it from the ground up by doing just some basic research in popular literature, news articles, magazines, and then extract the information from that. And this is where creating a career resource guide comes in. So, instructions on exactly how to do that, the purpose of the guide, you extract the information from popular literature, and you build your own career information because it may not be in our traditional sources that we're used to using. You create some, John Krumboltz has done some great work on creating video clips of unusual careers in his Aspire to Work site. And so maybe you go out in the community and you interview some people in green jobs and you build that into your collection, and you can have your own YouTube of career information.
But what you're really saying is there's always going to be new and emerging occupations that we're just not going to have access to in a traditional way.
Right.
But the old-fashioned way of clipping articles, linking up, having a file where people can look through it is at least a starting point.
Right, exactly.
And really just keeping open and listening.
Yeah. I mean, you could build a web link around information sources on that too.
Yeah.
Agencies that are tracking on that organization.
Good question.
So.
All right, we have just a couple minutes left. Let's get one more question in. Yeah.
We had a couple folks indicate they would like to see additional resources, a list of resources that you think are fundamental to a good career, or any connections that might be on your site at FSU. Do you have a good site location where they can go and look up types of resources?
Yep. So we have one more. Why don't we give the web link again? Because you do have a lot of resources on there that do walk through actually a lot of the topics we've talked about.
Well, there's our Career Center website, career.fsu.edu, and there is a library section on there that highlights information related to our career library, and also what we call our library links. So we've tried to build a series of links for users, students, job hunters, other people who need information sources. And again, we have a checklist that we use for deciding what goes on there. And then other information about our theory and the approach, career.fsu.edu/tech center, TECHCENTER. And that's where we really try to give away our theory. So it's, as like I said in the paper, I think it's one of the few career theories that has its own website, and there are the PowerPoints for a variety of our presentations, Jim Sampson's handbook on developing and implementing career programs, all the PowerPoints are there for that. A lot of the handouts that we use on what's involved in career choice, that's the client's version of our theory, the individual learning plan that I mentioned, all of that's on the Tech Center website for people to use. And so if there's something that you heard about today that you're interested in, that you'd like more information, my email is jlenz@fsu.edu. I'd be happy to respond to you and answer additional questions that we didn't have time for.
And we'll get this posted up on the website as well. So when they come to the afternoon tea, they'll have you there, and they can watch this. But we'll also get a list of those resource links so they can get right to those.
Okay.
Great.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of the hour. So this has been an afternoon tea with the Center on Education and Work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Do visit our website as well, cew.wisc.edu, to find out about our annual careers conference, our online career information systems, would be our WISC Careers Career Locker, and our new Singapore system, eCareers, as well as our many professional development opportunities related to translating career and workforce policy and research into practice. Information on how to view our afternoon tea conversations along with the readings for each session is also available on the website. I want to thank Bernard Sue for his invaluable help in coordinating the event, and Chris East for taking questions for us today. Nancy Mitchell and Anthony Hernandez for their graphic support. I want to thank Julie for taking some photographs, and we'll have some behind-the-scenes pictures of the different afternoon teas that you'll be able to see. Also our co-sponsors, the Department of Counseling Psychology and the Wisconsin Career Development Association, and as always, the Pyle Center and the UW Extension for the facility and technology support in making this available to an international audience. And on behalf of the staff of the Center on Education and Work, I want to express our thanks to you, Janet, for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right.